What if I told you that a fundamental, long-standing flaw in how Social Security is calculated has been quietly costing every retiree thousands of dollars? It's a startling claim, but what I'm about to lay out for you will reveal exactly why there's a growing movement for what could be the most significant one-time payout in decades. You'll want to stay with me right to the end, because the final piece of this puzzle is genuinely shocking and could change everything. Now here's the truth no one really says out loud. Over the past 2 decades, Social Security recipients have quietly lost thousands of dollars, not because of bad luck, but because of how the system itself measures your cost of living. And unless something changes, that loss will keep growing every single year. Before we dive in deeper, let me know in the comments what your age is and what state you're in. I'd love to see who's planning smarter out there and how these changes might affect you personally. Every fall, millions of Americans wait for one key announcement, the COLA, or cost of living adjustment. It's supposed to protect your Social Security check from inflation, right? In theory, yes. In reality, it's been falling behind for decades. And that gap, that few extra tenths of a percent each year, adds up to thousands of dollars gone by the time someone's in their 80s. For example, someone who started collecting in 2000 has already missed out on nearly $5,000. For newer retirees, that number could reach $12,000 before they're done collecting. But here's what's even more unbelievable. The government has known about this mismatch for years. They use something called the CPI-E to calculate COLA, which is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners. That sounds fine, except it was never designed for seniors. It tracks inflation for working-age people in cities, folks who spend differently than retirees. Think about it. You're not commuting, buying work clothes, or eating out 5 times a week anymore. Your budget is about healthcare, housing, utilities, and groceries. Things that rise faster than the CPI-E captures. That's where the CPI-E comes in. It's an index that actually reflects elderly consumers, meaning it tracks your real costs. And guess what? The CPI-E comes out higher than the CPI-E about 70% of the time. That's the core of the issue. If Social Security had been using the CPI-E all along, your checks would be larger, not by a little, but by hundreds per year. So, when you hear lawmakers talk about a fair adjustment, that's what they mean, switching to the CPI-E to finally match seniors' real inflation. But year after year, Congress introduces bills to fix it, and they stall. They never reach a vote. And that's what's driving a growing movement among retirees and advocacy groups. If we can't go back and fix all the missed adjustments, at least make it fair now. How? Through a one-time recovery payment, what some call a senior stimulus, somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000 per beneficiary. It's not charity, it's a correction, paying back what was quietly lost over decades of undercalculated COLAs. Before anyone says that'll never happen, let's look at why the pressure for this one-time payout is building faster than most realize. Inflation in 2025 stayed far higher than early projections expected. Healthcare premiums rose. Rent for seniors in assisted or independent living communities climbed nearly 6% nationwide. Groceries were up over 4%. Yet, the current cost of living formula only acknowledged about 2.7% of that. That's not just a rounding error, that's months of food, medication, and heating bills missing from the budget of someone who's done everything right their whole life. The government calls it an adjustment. Most seniors call it a cut that never stops cutting. And that's why groups like the Senior Citizens League are making more noise now than ever before. They've shown that if the CPI-E, the index that better reflects senior spending, had been used since the late 1990s, the average retiree today would be collecting about $120 more every single month. That doesn't sound huge, but multiply it by 20 years, and that's nearly $30,000. And we wonder why so many people say Social Security just doesn't stretch as far as it used to. What's really interesting is that 2026 could be the year that breaks the pattern. For the first time in over a decade, both sides of Congress have floated proposals to reevaluate the cost of living formula, not just to switch the index, but to consider a retroactive correction, basically a one-time check to close the gap. Nothing's passed yet, but the math alone makes it hard to ignore. The average American retiree has lost between $5,000 and $12,000 in real value, depending on when they started collecting. The argument is simple. If that shortfall came from the system's own mismeasurement, then seniors deserve to be repaid, and that's why you're hearing this phrase more often. A fairness stimulus. Not a handout, not a random relief check, but a recalibration. If you think that sounds too bold for Washington, remember this. They've already approved temporary boosts during past crises in 2008, 2020, and 2021. The precedent exists. What's changing now is the justification. It's not an emergency response, it's a structural correction. Here's what that might look like if it ever passes. a one-time payment deposited directly into beneficiaries' accounts, somewhere in the range of $6,000 to $12,000. The number wouldn't be random. It would scale based on how long you've been receiving benefits and how much cumulative inflation you've absorbed. Those who retired earlier, let's say between 1999 and 2014, would likely receive the higher end of that range. Newer retirees might see something smaller, but still meaningful. The important part is the precedent. It would mark the first official acknowledgement that Social Security's adjustment formula hasn't matched real life for decades, and it's not just numbers on a screen. I've read letters from viewers, some saying they can't keep up with dental costs, others forced to cut prescriptions in half to stretch the month. When your COLA increase is $50, but your insurance premium jumps by $80, that's not an increase. That's falling behind in slow motion. These are the people the fairness check aims to help, not with promises, but with actual dollars that should have been there all along. The crucial question, of course, is whether Congress will actually take action. What's happening behind closed doors right now is where the story takes a surprising twist, one that most people haven't heard yet and which could decide if this check ever becomes a reality. There's growing bipartisan agreement that the way Social Security tracks inflation is fundamentally broken. Even some younger lawmakers, the ones usually focused on other fiscal issues, are starting to realize that the system they'll inherit doesn't make sense. Think about it. We're still using a formula built around urban wage earners when the majority of beneficiaries are long past their working years. It's like using a 1990s weather forecast model to predict next week's storm. You're guaranteed to be off. Now, here's the kicker. According to multiple policy analysts, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been quietly updating its CPI-E model. That means even though the government hasn't officially adopted it, the data already exists, real-time monthly tracking of senior-specific inflation. If that data becomes the foundation for next year's COLA, it could be the most accurate cost of living adjustment ever issued. But that also exposes a big truth, that seniors were shortchanged for decades simply because of outdated math. That realization alone has fueled the argument for the one-time fairness payment. Let's talk numbers for a second. Based on recent inflation readings, the 2026 COLA is projected to land around 2.7%. That sounds decent until you compare it to actual household inflation for retirees, which currently sits closer to 3.4%. That gap might look small, but on a $2,000 monthly check, it means losing roughly $170 over the next year, money that disappears quietly without anyone noticing. Over time, it's thousands. Multiply that by tens of millions of recipients, and you're talking hundreds of billions of dollars that effectively never reach the people it was meant for. So here's what's on the table right now. Some lawmakers are considering a hybrid fix, officially adopting the CPI-E going forward and issuing a one-time retirement correction check, possibly staggered by retirement year. The exact amount hasn't been finalized, but the working model suggests between $5,000 and $10,000 for the average recipient, with slightly higher compensation for those who've been retired the longest. If you've ever felt like your benefits just haven't kept up with what life actually costs, well, this would be the government's way of saying you were right. Still, it's Washington. Every good idea has to survive a political storm before it becomes reality. Some argue it's too expensive. Others claim it's the right thing to do, but can't agree on how to fund it. Yet, public sentiment is shifting fast. Polls among Americans aged 60 and older show that over 80% support the correction payment, and nearly half say it would directly affect their ability to afford medical care or basic expenses this winter. Those numbers speak louder than party lines. And there's one more reason this might actually move forward. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to face shortfalls by the mid-2030s, but the proposed correction check wouldn't come from that fund. It would be structured as a special congressional appropriation, similar to previous relief programs, meaning it wouldn't deplete the ongoing benefit pool. That distinction makes it far more politically realistic than people think. So, if you're wondering if this is really possible, the answer is yes. Maybe for the first time in years, retirees have leverage because the data, the public pressure, and the politics are finally aligning. But whether that turns into real checks depends on what happens next, and the final part of this story is perhaps the most powerful, as it breaks down the key signs to watch for in the coming months that will tell us if this senior stimulus is actually happening and what you can do to stay ahead of it. Here is where it all comes together. Over the next few months, 3 key signals will show us whether this long overdue correction is moving forward or is just another promise lost in committee rooms. The first one is the October inflation report. That data sets the base for next year's COLA, and if the Bureau of Labor Statistics finally integrates the CPI-E fully into their reporting, that's the green light everyone's been waiting for. It would mean Washington can no longer pretend seniors' real expenses don't exist. The second sign will be a budget hearing already penciled in for early next year. If lawmakers mention COLA reform and retroactive adjustment in the same sentence, that's when you know the idea of a one-time check isn't just talk anymore. And the third signal is public demand. The more retirees share their stories about paying $400 for prescriptions, about skipping meals to keep the lights on, the harder it gets for Congress to look away. Let's be honest, you've paid into this system your whole life. You earned it. And if the math used to calculate your benefits turned out to be wrong even by a few tenths of a percent, then, yes, you deserve that correction. It's not a handout, it's accountability. You didn't build this system, but you helped fund it, and now the least it can do is live up to its promise. Some experts say the correction could come in 2026. Others think it might get folded into the broader Social Security reform package being drafted for the late 2020s. But here's the most important thing: awareness. The more people understand the issue, the faster momentum builds. If you've got friends or family on benefits, tell them about this. Share the numbers, the history, the way inflation has quietly eaten into retirees' checks for decades. Because this is the kind of pressure that actually moves policy. And I'll say this, I've seen a lot of stories over the years about people fighting just to be heard, but there's something different this time. Seniors are informed, organized, and speaking up louder than ever. They're showing that being retired doesn't mean being silent. Every letter, every call to a representative, every story shared online, it adds weight. Washington listens when the numbers start to move, and right now, they're moving. So if you take one thing away from all this, let it be this. What's happening right now isn't about hope. It's about math catching up with fairness. The numbers prove it. The history confirms it. And the people demanding it have earned every cent of what's owed, whether it comes as a $6,000 or $12,000 one-time payment, or as a reformed COLA system that finally reflects reality. It's not generosity, it's justice delayed. For those of you who have watched this far, I want to genuinely thank you for your time and for your commitment to staying informed on such a critical topic. This channel is dedicated to providing clarity and delivering real updates that matter to hardworking people, especially those who have contributed to the system their entire lives. If this is the kind of content you value, I hope you'll stick around and subscribe, so that when this major news finally breaks, you'll be the first to know instead of the last to find out. The reality is, what's on the horizon could be the most substantial change to Social Security in over 40 years, and you absolutely deserve a front row seat as it all unfolds.